So we all want to make a positive difference in the world, in our worlds. And I think that we all do, even if we might be able to all do more. Now, some of us think about it a lot, and some of us just go about our business. But we all do make a difference. Some of us seem wired to think about where we fit in our worlds from a young age, like the little boy who wrote the little essay that you heard earlier in Dixie's readings. Some of us wait until late in life, and maybe we never give it a thought. But we are all pieces of the puzzle of humanity, and each piece of the puzzle makes a difference. Without each of us, pieces would be missing. The puzzle wouldn't be complete. We all make a difference. This sermon is the story of someone who I think seemed to wonder all his life about how he would fit into the puzzle of the world and how he would make a difference. This is a story of someone who, for most of my consciousness of him, seemed sort of like a heroic ghost, but who in the end became real through a connection I made with him on social media. Now, one night earlier this month, I woke up early in the morning. Now, that's typical, but untypically, my cell phone wasn't on my bedside table. I'd left it like old men do at a friend's place and couldn't go pick it up later. Now, my cell phone is sort of my bedtime story these days. When I go to bed, a few minutes with it puts me to sleep or not. And when I wake up at 3:30 in the morning, a few minutes with it puts me back to sleep or not. That night, I'd been thinking about this sermon, and I'd written a little before I went to bed. And I woke up at 3:30 in the morning thinking about the sermon. When I'd gotten into bed that night without my cell phone, I'd read an essay by the aforementioned ghost hero, an essay in this book that I'll talk about. When I woke up at 3 in the morning, I read another essay. So I was thinking about all this and wondering how I was going to put this sermon together so that it would make sense to everybody, and I couldn't sleep. I decided to go downstairs and creep this old friend on Facebook. Now, for those of you who don't use social media or know this newfangled lingo, creeping is a thing you do when you try to find out about someone that you don't really know. You look at the trail they leave on their, preferred social media. Creeping is something you do to find out, like, about your son's new girlfriend. Or somebody who you just met, either at work or socially, who you'd like to know more about. But this is weird. I had known this person who I was creeping for a long time, since I was 8 years old, and I'll be 70 years old in about a month. And what I decided was important enough to get out of bed and go downstairs to find out. I wanted to find the last post that this ghost of mine had made on his preferred social media venue, Facebook, before he had died back in 2019. Maybe this wasn't creeping, maybe it was just creepy. It's kind of creepy that people's trails on social media don't go away after they die. It's been said that even God can't get rid of your Facebook profile. Anyway, when I opened my laptop, I looked at the little clock up in the upper corner, and it was 3:44 a.m. I discovered that the ghost's Facebook page was still pretty active. As I scrolled down, I saw a post I made back in March of this year thanking the ghost posthumously for reminding me about the birthday of Ralph Ellison, who wrote The Invisible Man. Before I got down to his last post, I read remembrances from his friends who I knew and mostly didn't know, from various students whose lives he had changed, notes about this posthumously published book of essays which most of his friends were reading, notes from his daughters and his wife on his birthday or the anniversary of his death, or just because they were thinking about him. The ghost's name is Ned Stuckey French. He's the same guy who wrote the little essay, Nightmare, that Dixie read earlier. He died way too early from cancer on June 28th of 2019. By the time I'd scrolled through his Facebook page to get to his final post, I looked at the clock on my computer and it was 6:52 a.m. His last post, written 17 days before his passing, read, "A beautiful and arresting piece by Steve Almond about reading and writing to find out who we are." It had a link to an article by Mr. Almond titled, "Let Us Now Praise Unfamous Men." Seemed kind of a letdown after 3 hours of scrolling. But when I read the linked article, it was eerily close to my sermon topic. Mr. Almond wrote about a life filled with doubts. So anyway, who is this Ned Stuckey French, this hero ghost in my life? Well, after third grade at Old Morton School in West Lafayette, my parents bought my mom's dream house in a much swankier neighborhood called Hills and Dales, just to the east of the Purdue Athletic Complex. And my new school was the brand new Kingston Elementary School. Kingston was about 5 blocks from my house. Early in my first year, my 4th grade year, I became really good friends with a boy in my class who lived on my way home, whose name was Hugh French. Hugh and I would stop at his house on the way home most days. Hugh's mom, who didn't really particularly want to deal with either of us at that time of day, a lot of times would give Hugh 4 quarters from her purse and say, "Now, boys, go down to Arse soda fountain at Arse drugstore and get yourself a treat." This was a great deal for an 8-year-old like me, whose parents were much, much too cheap to engage in such frivolities. Now, Old Man Arth, who owned the store, had a famous deal, or at least famous in West Lafayette. He had kind of a banana split lottery. He had a whole stem about 3 feet tall hanging behind the counter, and each banana had a price tag on it, but the price was on the underside of the price tag. And you selected a banana before you got your banana split. Now, the standard price for a banana split back then, and this is longer than some of you have been around, not longer than all of you, was 39 cents. And, you know, on the hidden price, you usually got a little bit off just to make you feel good, like a couple cents. You know, I guess you could get 5 cents off. Once I got a quarter off, that was a really good day. And the little sign next to the bunch of bananas said you could even get a banana split for a penny. I never saw that happen. But going to Arse for a banana split was obviously not just tasty, it was kind of exciting too. But however good and impressive they were, I don't really remember one particular Arse drugstore banana split after school experience with my friend Hugh. The specific walking home with Hugh experience that I remember was the day Hugh told me we were going to have a really special experience at his house. And when we got to his house, he turned on the big console stereo and he put on the brand newly released 45 of the Beatles' I Want to Hold Your Hand. The reverse side was I Saw Her Standing There. He told me that his brother Ned had brought home this newly released record the day before, and Hugh said that Ned thought this music was going to change the world. And I guess he was right. Now, Ned wasn't there, but I was almost as impressed with the fact that Ned thought so much of this record as I was with the song, and I love the song. Both songs. Ned was almost 3 years older than Hugh and me. And 3 years doesn't seem like a lot, but it's a big deal when you're just 8 years old. He was in junior high, and he was handsome, athletic, funny, and really, really smart. I rarely saw him, but he'd already had sort of a legendary heroic status to me, and I think to his little brother Hugh. He was that rare guy who was liked and revered by almost everyone, from his peers to his teachers, and the girls loved him. We all wanted to be like Ned. Hugh and I remained friends through high school, and I'd see Ned from time to time. He was everybody's high school hero. He was a football player, football star, who graduated at the very top of his class academically. And I remember vaguely that he got a perfect score on his SATs, and he got into Harvard on what was probably a part football, part academic scholarship. So before I graduated from high school, this mythical hero went off farther into the ghostly, foggy distance. After our school days, Hugh and I played golf at our high school reunion every 10 years, and I would ask about Ned, and I'd get a few stories about what he was up to, but then Facebook happened. I connected with Hugh, who would from time to time share a post his big brother had made, and soon enough, I was a Facebook friend of Ned's too, and the ghost began to come into focus. The gauze lifted, and he became more and more real. Ned was a professor of English with a specialty in essay writing at Florida State. He had a really active Facebook presence with the most interesting cadre of followers and contributors I'd ever seen, and I do a little bit of Facebook. His friends were writers, former students, and old school friends, and of course, his family with a pair of brilliant daughters who both had literary names. Ned thrived on Facebook in a crowd that reflexively poo-pooed it. He'd actually wrote an essay called I Am Ned Facebook, which he delivered to a big writers' conference. The closing paragraph of the essay reads, I close in the hope that we essayists might be able to use Facebook not only as material, but as a place to create community. In that vein, I hope that by the time I get back to my hotel tonight, I'll have some new friend requests from a few of you. Again, Ned thrived on Facebook. Thing is, Ned Stuckey French, this confident, heroic figure, turned out, as I got to know him, to be a very human being. A being with doubts and fears. A kind man who seemed to want to see both sides of an issue to the extent that he sometimes seemed unsure. A guy who would engage thoughtfully with even his political opposites, and even occasionally with a bully who might venture onto his feed. His friend and colleague, Hope Edelman, one of the many who eulogized him, wrote, those who followed Ned's Facebook page soon became familiar with a small group of vocal men. They included a gun-owning millionaire in rural Montana, a pastor in Michigan with a penchant for posting at 1 a.m., and a middle-aged libertarian in Virginia who never missed an opportunity to post about socialists and commies, and not in a flattering way. In his responses, Ned held his ground respectfully. His rebuttals were often filled with elaborate references to history, literature, philosophy, economics, and public policy. The breadth of his knowledge was, in a word, extraordinary. John Price, one of Ned's former classmates and his closest friend, once asked him on Facebook why he put up with such vitriol. Ned replied, "Because interacting with these people makes me a better person." I think Ned knew that he was a good person. That said, his essays, his Facebook feed are all laced with doubts. You can see this plainly in an essay he wrote about his time at Massachusetts General Hospital in the 70s, going into the 80s, actually. And we need a bit of background here. When I say Mass General, you probably think that this perfect guy, after getting degrees from Harvard and Brown, would have gone there as the director or, at least a vice president. But he went to work at Mass Gen as a janitor. Ned wanted to do good in the world. In school, he'd been a member of the Socialist Workers' Party in Boston's radical student community. And he went to Mass Gen with a very dumbed-down resume and got himself a job as a janitor in the ER. He wanted to help unionize the workforce, which Ned and the party saw, and pretty easily, I might add, as exploited. He stayed in this position for 9 years. He stayed for 9 years of a promising life. And in the end, he left with doubts. He wrote in his essay, simply titled Mass General, "Marx adopted a proverb. The way to hell is paved with good intentions. And most everybody would still say he was right, but were my intentions even good?" I know Ned wanted to think so, but he goes on, "I learned what it is like to become invisible because your uniform is blue. I learned that a 3% raise has more to do with self-esteem than with dollars. But when I finally decided to leave the hospital and move back to the Midwest, I thought that perhaps the race baiters and red baiters in the Mass General personnel office had been right when they said, 'Ned's an outsider. He's not even one of you.' I was white, male, middle class, and college educated. Sometimes I still feel guilty and buy into that outside agitator slur. I sum up my 9 years at the hospital as petit bourgeois tourism." This is from everybody's high school hero who had spent 9 years of his promising life trying to make the world a better place, and honestly with some success. Though the union was yet to be official by the time Ned left, conditions and pay for workers had gotten better. The workers eventually were unionized, and today they're represented by United Healthcare Workers East. And last week in the news, they were on strike for better working conditions. To me, this 9 years was more heroic than the football, the grades, the adulation of his high school peers, but the hero had doubts. If you look at his posthumous book, and I'll give anybody his name, you can Google it, or all of his other books or his anthologies, which I highly recommend, you'll see the story of a baby boomer growing up in the 60s. You'll see his observations about life, doubts, and finding a place in the puzzle of humanity. When Ned died of cancer way too young in 2019, I'd gotten to know him and to be a part of his community. And, to the extent that I grieved as much as I would with any other best friends who have died. From the years ago spin of the Beatles record, Ned's Beatles record, which turned me on to my own musical journey separate from that music that my parents used to play, to his essays and to his Facebook feed, this man who simply had been a ghost for most of my life made a real positive difference. I think after getting over the hero on a pedestal thing, it was his humanity and his doubts and his quest to find his place that are remarkable. If this guy, this successful and heroic guy could have doubts, my doubts seem more natural, more human. Everyone's doubts seem more natural and more human. He opened me up to seeing that maybe all real heroes have doubts. From George Washington to Abraham Lincoln to Dr. King and on and all, they all had doubts. Doubts are human, and though it is almost impossible not to dwell on them from time to time, it's important to know that we are all pieces of humanity's puzzle and that we all make a difference.